Fire Emblem is a series that I personally have a lot of love for, but haven't played most of the games. While there are several games in the series that I and others deem as amazing experiences, the amount of these games that I've actually finished or played a fair amount of can be counted on two hands. While I love a lot of the ideas in these games, I'm just not the best at these types of games, which can make them rather intimidating, at least to me. But still, the games that I have played, I've found a lot of love in them and enjoyed them quite a bit. And with Fire Emblem Engage finally out after a month, I think it's time for me to talk about this game. And spoiler alert, I really like this game. So this is going to be a bit of a lengthier one, so grab your snacks, grab whatever else you're going to need, as today I'm going to be explaining why I not only love Fire Emblem Engage, but also why it's my favorite in the series. Now, before we begin, some things I should mention. Spoilers. There's going to be spoilers in this video. If you have not played this game yet, then you should probably go do that, unless you don't really care about spoilers. And number two, this is all my opinion. Don't let my opinion dictate what yours is. Feel free to think for yourself. I don't feel I really need to say that, but I may as well throw it in regardless. But yeah, I don't really have much else to say, so let's get into this review, because this is going to be a lengthy one, as explaining as to why I love Fire Emblem Engage. Alright, let's get this out of the way, as I would say this is the thing that people may have talked about the most, at least from what I've seen. The art style and the visuals. I've seen several people say that it looks too weebish or too much like Genshin Impact to even give the game a fair chance. Now, to be fair, art is subjective, and I can see where people are coming from, but to be honest, I honestly really like the art style of the game. Yes, I don't think the art style gives the best first impression, as when I first saw it, I kind of thought that it looked really different, especially since if you played the previous games which had more dark and realistic art styles, this one sticks out a lot more, but I honestly really like it. It may not be for everyone, but I really admire the variety of colors for the world as opposed to something like, say, Three Houses, where that game tried to look more realistic and dark, but instead, to me, it looked really dull and boring as hell, at least environment-wise. Now, the main thing people talk about is mainly the character designs. This is the one where people kind of go, oh, the character designs are not so good. But honestly, I like them all to an extent. While some are better than others, I wouldn't say there's any character in this game that makes me think they needed to be redesigned badly. Again, it doesn't leave the best first impression, but after some getting used to know the characters better, soon enough you'll get past the designs and just see them for who they are. Characters. And don't worry, I'm gonna dedicate an entire section of this video just to talking about the characters. More on that later though. Now, while I like this game's art style, the game's performance is also quite good. It is a Switch game, so it isn't anything crazy, but still feels really good to look at, whether in a battle or cutscene or on the TV or in handheld mode. I should also say that the animations in this game are also really good, specifically for crits, as they look really cool, kind of being similar to that of the GBA entries in the series. Also, the animated cutscenes in the game look really good as well, and there's quite a few of them. They look really good, much better than Three Houses with its choppy anime style cutscenes. Okay, don't worry, I love Three Houses too, but I need to take a jab at it every now and then. The only real thing visually in this game that's kind of disappointing is the lack of hand-drawn character portraits, which is kind of a shame, as almost all the previous games had them, and they looked really good in those games. Though maybe it's because they wanted to focus more on the expressions and movements of the character models, but that's my guess. Even so, it isn't the worst thing ever, because the game looks so good in the first place. It doesn't bother me at all, but I do miss them. I did really like those character portraits. Overall, visually, this has to be one of the best looking games in the series, and while it isn't for everyone, and some people may not like it, I like it. Oh yeah, should I mention outfits? Well, not the most interesting. You can put everyone in swimsuits and fursuits, so easily it's the best game ever, no question. All right, let's get into the big meat. Let's take a look at the gameplay. Possibly the most important aspect to any game is, of course, the gameplay. Now, if you've never played Fire Emblem before, first of all, well, why are you watching this video? And second, it's basically a tactical RPG where you move units around on a map to either defeat all the enemies or defeat the boss. There's different weapons certain units and certain classes can use, which can be effective against certain enemies, such as bows being effective on flying units. However, if a unit loses all their HP, they die for good and can't be used again unless you're playing on Filthy Casual mode. I actually play on casual mode. There's not really much I have to say about the main gameplay, as for the most part, it hasn't been changed at all, which, even so, it's still pretty solid, but what makes this game different from the other games is a couple of new features. The first and main one being the emblem rings. Now, I could see some people who haven't played this game say that the emblem rings are nothing more than fan service and can just break the game very easily, and while they may be somewhat partially correct, I really like them. Starting off with the whole fan service point, you have a pretty solid roster of characters for the rings spanning across the whole series, giving exposure to practically every game in the series. And it's also just cool to see the old heroes once again, but now in the art style of Engage. I think it's just really cool. But also their abilities are pretty cool as well, not only giving you now like multiple new weapons to use, but also some really cool abilities that you can use once, with some of them like being like crazy finisher moves like Marth's, Leaf's, and Lucina's. There's also some more creative ones like Celica, where you can basically teleport anywhere to use the Ragnarok magic, and Sigurd's, which allows you to cut through an entire line of enemies, which can be really fun, and there's many more abilities as well. Now, while yes, these can be broken if you utilize them properly, there are some battles where the enemies themselves use the emblem rings against you. Now, while this doesn't happen very often and only happens in specific battles, it still gives you a challenge as they give you a taste of your own medicine, and I really like that, because it really kind of shows you what you're doing. Speaking of challenge though, let's get into the difficulty, and I honestly don't think the difficulty is too bad. Now, I played the game on normal. It did still feel like it actually did require skill to beat the game, unlike the Phoenix mode in Fates. I will say that while most battles were fine, though, the only battles that I felt were actually pretty difficult was probably chapters 21 and 25, as those had reinforcements that felt very overwhelming. Okay, just to clear this up, I know that the reinforcements stop on chapter 21. I just didn't know that on my first time playing, so that's why I put it here. But other than those, the other battles in the game are fairly manageable, but it still feels like you actually gotta try. It does, you kinda do need to still plan things out properly, but they're not too difficult. Hell, the final boss is honestly much easier than I thought, but still a really cool battle, and my favorite final boss in the series, at least from the games that I've played. I'll get into that a little bit more later. I guess one more thing I should mention is the time crystal, which allows you to correct mistakes you make within battle by rewinding. I've seen people argue that this is a terrible thing, as it basically allows players to, for lack of better words, cheat through a level, since you can just rewind if anything goes wrong. And while I can understand this, I feel differently, as it feels more like a quality of life improvement. In the older Fire Emblem games, if things went wrong, you'd ultimately have to reset the entire battle in order to try again, leading to a lot more frustration on the player's part, which, thanks now to the Times Crystal, negates a lot of this frustration. Now, I know there's many players out there that do not like using this sort of stuff, so guess what? You don't have to use it. Yeah, if you want to play the game like how the older games played, just don't use the time crystal. It never forces you to use it, so if you don't like the idea of it, then don't use it. If you appreciate the quality of life, then use it to your heart's content. Either way is the correct way of playing the game. Enjoy the game you want to. Now, if there is something that I can mention that is a bit of an issue, it's the amount of units you can deploy. Despite this game's big roster of units, you're only going to be able to use around 8 to 12 units per map, which can make it very easy to bench units that aren't performing very well, only for them to never be usable later in the game, mostly due to very few ways to leveling up their stats and whatnot. Aside from the main story battles, there's also the paralogs, which are basically trials where you fight an emblem on a map from their respective game, but you can only do these once, and they get rather difficult in some of them, especially Leaf's. I thought his was kind of difficult. Wasn't like super bad, but it wasn't the easiest thing ever. It wasn't like Lucina's. The other battles you can do are the skirmishes or training, but these scale with the level of a leader, so if your units are very under-leveled, good luck ever getting them back up to being good. While I was able to rebuild a couple of units to become good, such as Etier and Chloe, part of the reason I was able to do this is because I had a bunch of permanent stat boost items that I never used and just used them on them, so that's basically what I did there. But really though, it's not the it's still there. I don't know. I still think the game's really good. The battle system in this game is still pretty solid. It does have its issue with benching characters, but the game never gets to the point of losing its fun. However, this is only half the story. Similar to Three Houses Monastery, Engage also has its own hub world, the Somnial, which you can run around, which can be a lot of fun. And while it's much more simple and much smaller than that of the Monastery, there's still plenty of things you can do here. There's several things here that can boost supports between characters, such as meals where you can share a meal with two characters, which is good, but I have one issue with this. Well, actually two, but mainly one. You see, in Three Houses, when choosing a meal, you choose the main course first, then you choose the characters that like it, as it shows you what characters like with meal. It's very simple, but now in Engage, it's the opposite, where you choose the characters first, then the meal. How did they screw this up? Because now you have to waste more time finding a meal than that the cook can actually make, but also keep going through characters to see which ones like which meals. This isn't the biggest issue ever, but I do feel like this is something that really does annoy me, and I honestly do wish that in the future they could hopefully fix this, because I don't like it. It's really annoying. I don't like it, though I doubt they'll ever fix it. And there's also just the fact that you can have results for a meal be rather jarring. The cook could be an expert on a meal, and you can have all the ingredients, and it could end up being an F rank meal. How does that happen? I just think it's really stupid how that can actually happen. I don't like that at all. But aside from the meals, you can also go to other areas of the Somnial, such as the pool or the orchard, where you can have two characters do activities together to raise supports in a more efficient way, which can be very helpful if you're trying to see all the supports in a game, especially supports for characters that you benched a while ago, like I did. You can also use the arena where characters can fight each other to get stronger, maybe. I honestly didn't use it that much. You can also find a lot of animals that you can adopt that after finishing battles, which can give you ingredients that can be very helpful for making good meals. I forgot to even mention, after each battle in the game, you can actually run around part of the map and actually find like materials and stuff like that and talk to the characters. I love that. I think it's so cool. I like that. Going back to the Somnial though, there are a couple of mini games in the form of fitness training and also riding a wyvern. For the fitness mini games, I honestly don't care too much for them. They aren't bad, but they ultimately just boil down to either button mashing or pressing the buttons at the right time. I honestly didn't do these at all after a while. As for the wyvern riding minigame, it's much better, as this one's basically an on-rail shooter where you shoot targets in the air while trying to get a high score. It's very simple, but I really like this one. It's much more fun than the fitness ones. However, there is one more, I guess, minigame. I'm not sure if this completely counts, but is Sami. See, there's this pet in the Somnial that you can take care of in this cavern that feels very different. You can feed it various things and pet it and do other things with it, and while I didn't do this the most, I think we can all agree Sami is the best character in the game, exuberating swag wherever he is. Now, moving on to the Tower of Trials, this is where you can compete in various types of online/local events, such as the Tempest Trials, where you can fight consecutive battles over and over for rewards, but can also make your own maps for others to fight on, as well as fight against other players' main army, which is either units at stats from very early in the game that are making them really, really easy, or borderline cheating. In fact, sometimes full on. I've actually done these battles a lot, as not only are they quick, but they can be used to grind supports very efficiently. Basically, do one of these battles, quick battles I mean, go back to the Samiel and do the support building activities, then do another quick battle, do the support building activities, repeat, 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 repeat. This is the strategy I use to build supports as efficiently as possible, so hopefully it can help you all out. A few other things I should mention is, first off, the photo mode, which is really fun to fiddle around with. You can create shots with your favorite characters in cool poses, which can be used on your profile card, which I haven't even mentioned. Profile cards! I really like these, as it can be fun to make your own, and you can even collect others' cards through the Tower of Trials. It honestly reminds me a bit of that one card thing that you could get in Animal Crossing New Leaf that was like personalized. I love this sort of stuff. I like this. It's so cool. Another small thing I really like are the wake up events. Whenever you go to your room and you go to sleep, there's a good chance that another character you have a support with can wake you up, which is such a small addition, but I love this as it gives characters extra dialogue, which this can be some really good ASMR content. Like, seriously, there's like hours of this dialogue in the game, which is a lot of fun. And I think that's pretty much all you can do in the Samiel. Ring chamber. The ring chamber! You can make bond rings of other characters in the series and also clean the rings to make the emblems feel weird. Oh, I love it. I'd say the Samiel is pretty solid overall, though it also has a similar issue to that of the Monastery from Three Houses, that being that you're pretty much doing the same things over and over in between battles, which can get rather monotonous, but I still really like it. Overall, the gameplay in this game is really solid. It goes back to the roots of the older games, but also brings in new, fresh ideas that elevate the experience. And while not everything in the game is perfect, the game is still so much fun that it never feels like the negatives ever outweigh the positives. However, gameplay alone isn't the only thing that makes a game memorable. Next, let's take a look at the story. The story of this game. Now, I'll be completely honest, it isn't anything to write home about. It doesn't exceed any expectations, but it's still not too bad. Though, before we get into the main story, let's first talk about supports. Now, there are a lot in the game, and thus, I haven't seen them all yet, though I am getting there. And I can say that this game has some really good supports. I will say that I think the supports overall aren't as good as memorable as that of Three Houses supports, but I still think that there are some really good ones in here. Some of my favorites are Alcrest and Hortensia, Rosado and Lapis, Saline and Alcrest, Etier and Goldmary, and many, many more. I would say that the supports themselves are rather solid, though do vary in how good they are. But what about the S supports? Well, they're different in this game and not necessarily in a good way. While I like the idea that one of the paralogs is required for getting the Pact Ring, which makes S supports unlocked, the S supports themselves feel a lot more tame than previous games, with very few of them feeling romantic. In fact, romance is barely in this game at all, which is kind of strange since that's one of the things people really enjoy about these games. Now, I can understand that since several characters in the game are rather young, I can see why they would tone down on this stuff, but I think there should have just been more romance in general. Though, it does seem to be more of a localization issue, as the Japanese version does have more romantic undertones, at least from what I've heard. I get it for the spots it makes sense in, but I feel like they really went a little too far with it. I'd say S supports overall aren't as good as the previous games, but they do at least give us some really good art of the characters, so there's that. At least my girl Ivy got a good S support. But aside from the main supports between the Engage exclusive characters, there are also the bond supports, with each emblem having conversations with every character you can play as. These are much shorter than actual supports, only lasting about 2 to 4 sentences, which on paper seems rather disappointing, but if you remember that they have CBA conversations with every character, it's honestly pretty cool. Although it's not really something that everyone's going to be able to see, as you're probably not going to see all Bond conversations for every character. You'd probably just have to go to YouTube and go to a Bond conversation compilation on YouTube or something like that, which was kind of what I did for those. And, like, it's just another thing I really like. I just like it a lot. I like seeing the emblems have more of a role rather than just being utility. I like it. Also, I just want to mention that I basically put the prediction in there in that Engage video on my hopes for Engage, so that's really fun to have come true. A little bit. Now, finally moving on to the actual story. While I won't go into full detail on everything, I will tread through the story and touch on areas I feel should be touched upon, so let's go. So after a fever dream, you, the Divine Dragon, finally wake up after 1,000 years completely unaware of the world when you and some of your watchers get attacked by Corrupted, which are basically this game's form of zombies. After getting a little help from the emblem of Goody Goody by Scott, Marth, you meet your mother who, god damn, look at her, and then watch her die like 5 minutes later. Yeah, I know that the many people dislike how Fire Emblem protagonists have to lose a parent at some point in the story, but I'm glad that they at least got it out of the way rather quickly so that way it doesn't hang throughout the entire game. Eventually, we meet up with the Prince and Princess of Firene, Alfred, and Celine and help them deal with some naughty enemies that are trying to take the same rings we use in battle for themselves. After cleaning up that mess and running into a white girl named Vale, we finally get to Brodia and see that Elugia, the other kingdom nearby, doesn't really get along with Brodia, leading to them attacking with their own emblem rings. After cleaning them up in Brodia and fighting them in their own territory, and having another parent die, that's like 2 so far, you finally get introduced to the main villains of the game, Sombron and the Four Hounds, and also showing Vale for who she is, and I'll just say my 2 cents on them here. Sombron's fine, I don't really have anything to say on him, he's just kind of evil and that's it. His design and dragon form are cool though. As for the Four Hounds, I honestly don't really care for Zephyr and Gris. If anything, I kind of find them annoying, mostly considering how much you fight them in the game and they just don't do anything for me at all. Marnie is fine, although her existence was her death was very predictable. I'll get more into that later. And doesn't do much for me either. Though Mavier is the GOAT, though I will also save that for later. But anyways, after pretty much losing all of your emblem rings to the enemies and realizing Vale is actually evil, kinda, you escape with the help of baby girl Princess Ivy and her retainers. Now, out of Elugia and finding themselves in Solm, they quickly realize it's a very different dynamic than before, with the kingdom being much more free and happy, which I really like this change because it's a nice change of pace where it goes from being more serious and dark, okay, it's not that dark, but just go along to it, to being much more happy and jovial. Once you find more rings, you fight the Four Hounds more and more times, and eventually you find out that Vale's actually being mind controlled by Zephyr, and after chasing more after them, you finally corner Mavier and Marnie, getting them to finally agree to at least get to where the others are. After Marnie getting the axe, literally, which by the way was predictable as all hell, you finally get Mavier in his unit, which is so cool to see him finally fight back against those who are actually evil and attempt to save Vale. After finally freeing Vale from the mind control, Pepsi Man gets knocked out by Sombron, who is just kind of there, just waiting to revive the fallen kingdom of Gradlon for some reason. Though he gets brought back to life as a corrupted by Vale, but now you finally get Vale as a unit, and you go through a map in the game where you retrieve all of the rings that you've wanted for so long, and finally Colgate becomes the 13th emblem. And because of some sort of miracle thing with the emblems or Deus Ex Machina, Pepsi Man is finally brought back to life. And after ending the remaining hounds and your mother again, you finally make your way to the final battle, which all this final battle is really, really good. Not only are you fighting a huge dragon in space, but he also summons enemies that are similar to the final bosses from the other games. Hell, the emblems even have unique dialogue when fighting their respective final boss, which is so cool! I love that so much. Once you finally land the finishing blow, you finally stop Sombra and see all the emblems go back to their respective worlds. Now, obviously, I skimmed over quite a bit, though. If you're watching this video, you probably, I hope, have a decent understanding of the story, and overall, I quite like it. I've seen a lot of people say the story is bad, and while yes, the story isn't as interesting as, say, Three Houses, I like the simplicity of this game. It isn't like this game is trying to be super creative or innovative with its story. It was meant to be more campy, and that I think they did very well. Also, can I just say how much I like that this game is only one route? For a while, Fire Emblem games just couldn't just be one concise story. They had to have all these branching story paths that, while yes, it gives the game more perspective and more replay value, it makes playing the full game and understanding the whole story a lot more of a chore than anything else. So I'm very glad they did away with that in this game. Also, I really like how this game actually has an epilogue. It makes it feel like the game actually has a real ending, unlike Three Houses. But enough of me bashing Three Houses. To wrap up this segment, I like the story of the game, even despite it not being super thought-provoking. But it's simple, but I like that. It's not trying to do too much. But regardless of how good the story is, the main thing I always look for within a story is its characters. So let's finally get to talking about the characters. To me, the most important part of any Fire Emblem game is, of course, its characters. Even if the story for a game isn't the best or not good at all, if it can still have fun and interesting characters, I really don't care because at least I'm being entertained. Now, I won't be able to talk about every character in this video, but I will talk about at least the main ones, the main playable characters. Starting off with Pepsi Man. Oh, wait, I meant Colgate. Wait, I meant Alear. Jokes aside, Alear is honestly much better than I thought. If I were to keep it as basic as possible, Alear is basically Corrin from Fates, but just done better and not a complete B-word. I'm not going to say it. Well, he's not the most interesting character ever, since, again, he is the protagonist, so he is kind of more subdued with his personality. He's still pretty good and still has some depth that is explored throughout the game, explaining both where he comes from and why his hair is both red and blue. And going back to the personality thing, he's obviously the everyday man that's treated like the greatest thing ever, since, well, he is a dragon, but he can still be a fun and normal character to have around, especially considering how many of the characters in this game are unhinged, but more on that another time. Now, moving on to the main lord, starting off with Alfred. I quite like him a bit. Although I haven't seen the most of him, he is still really good from what I've seen, being all about building muscle and at one point being ill, which is why he's like that, which is pretty different from what people were expecting, many thinking him to be just a younger Dimitri. Honestly, design-wise, it really doesn't help because he kind of just looks like if Dimitri had a child, but thankfully Alfred is different and there's a little bit going on with him. So yeah, Alfred's not too bad. And now going to Diamant, I don't really have much to say on him either. Honestly, out of all the characters, he feels like the most like a typical Fire Emblem protagonist, since he's strong as hell, he's a lord, his personality fits with the other protagonists of the series, and he also has a parent eye as well. He's honestly pretty good, though I don't think he's the best character in my opinion, because it's not like there's really much about him that's really bad at all, but he's not the most interesting thing ever. Honestly, I'd say his brother's more interesting, but that's for another day. But still, Diamant's pretty cool.
Now moving on to Ivy, who is probably my favorite from this game, or at least the best girl in this game, or at least the best lord in this game. I'll be honest, before release, I thought she would be a female Hubert, which I was really scared of. While she was the character I was the most interested in before the game came out, I was nervous how they were going to tackle her, whether or not she'd be like Tharja or Camilla from Awakening of Fates. Thankfully, they made her a really good character. She's a much more interesting character. She's very, very down to earth than you'd ever think. While she's not like outwardly mean, at all, but she's not the most talkative person in the entire army, which I like. She's willing to talk when people talk to her, which I like. I also think her story is also more interesting since she's the only lord you actually fight a couple times before finally recruiting her, which is the only character that is like that, which kind of gives a little bit more perspective on kind of her story, why she stopped dealing with her, stopped supporting her father and supported you instead. And I'll just say this kind of off topic, that B support between her and Alir, oh my lord, that caught me so by surprise the first time I saw that. Also, another thing I should probably mention is that she's hot as hell. I mean, look at her, and you better believe that she was the girl I S supported. I mean, I've pretty much already said that she's probably the best one. And while I haven't seen all of the S supports, this one feels a lot more romantic than the others. So, yeah, Ivy's overall best girl. Tamara's alright. There's nothing really wrong with Tamara at all. It's just that there's not really a lot to her. She's a lot of fun and down to earth as well, which is fun since that's pretty much what she's all about. But there's really not much else to her besides that. Ivy's cute as well, but there's a lot more story going on with her. And it's not like every character has to have these super deep stories. I'm fine with that, but I don't know. Tamara's kind of just fine. But she's still a fun and likable character, and honestly, that's all I really need at the end of the day. And that pretty much does it for the main lords, though there is one more character I want to talk about, at least in detail here, that being Vale, since I feel she's important enough to be included here. I like Vale quite a bit, although it is quite a bit before you can play as her, since she spends a good chunk of the game either being the cute sister trying to find her sibling, who's, spoiler alert, you, and also the other part of the time being mind controlled and being like the edge lord. But once you finally stop the mind control and can play as her and view supports with her, she's a real Cinnabon, liking her spicy food and whatnot, which is kind of the exact opposite of what you would expect. Her story is also more interesting, as similar to Ivy, you fight Vale a couple of times throughout the game, albeit under the mind control thing, but also wishes to find her sibling, which, yeah, that happens. I like Vale, but honestly, to be fair, who doesn't? And really, that's all the characters I'm going to go into detail here. But just to rattle off some other characters I like, man, I freaking adore Saline, Chloe, Etier, Yunaka, Elchris, Lapis, Amber, Hortensia, Rosado, Goldmary, Fagato, Marin, Panette, Mavier, so many grades. And if you want to know more on what I think of all of these characters and the rest of the characters and whatnot from this game, I do intend in the future to make a Engage characters tier list, so do be sure to stick around for that when it happens. I would say the characters overall are pretty good, and while they may not be as deep or interesting as, say, Three Houses characters, you do need to keep in mind that this game was made in a different way and isn't meant to be very realistic or dark. It's meant to be more light-hearted, so I'm completely fine with it, and these characters absolutely fit in with the world and story that this game was going for. Besides, the characters are still fun, so good. Now, with all of that said, I think it's time to get into some of the other things I want to talk about that I don't have as much to say, but we'll just put into their own section. So this section is going to pretty much just be dedicated to the smaller things I want to mention that I'm not going to make into a full section. So, yeah, you already know what miscellaneous means. So, let's start off with the music of this game. Now, I'll be honest, the music in this game isn't the best, I'll admit. But the music, when it gets going, it gets going. Even the music, when the music is more subdued and more ambiance like, I really like it. I actually really like the piano that can be heard when in Alir's bedroom. I just find it very calming. Sometimes I'll leave the game on with the song in the background just to listen to while doing other things. Kind of like a virtual fireplace. Okay, maybe that's a little weird, but still. I really like it still, and honestly, if anybody knows the name of that song, feel free to let me know down in the comments below. But if somebody else has already said it, then don't say it yourself, please. I don't need to be bombarded with comments like that. Another small thing I really like about this game is the intro for this game. And while it's nothing that special, as I'll be honest, the song for it isn't my favorite, I do appreciate that they made an animation specifically for the intro, because the intro is one of the cleanest looking ones in the series in terms of telling you what this game is about, but also just being really cool to look at. And I hate to keep using Three Houses as my punching bag, but to use Three Houses as my punching bag once again, that game's intro just took cutscenes from the rest of the game, whether it was the animated cutscenes and whatnot, and I just didn't really care for that. I've seen other games and like other series and whatnot do the same sort of thing, where they'll just use the cutscenes from within the game for the intro. And while I can understand it, I just like how Engages is actually fully animated for the purpose of being an intro. I honestly think it just makes for a much better intro. Yeah, I really like it. And another thing to mention is the DLC, which I know I could have mentioned this in the gameplay section, but not only was that section already bloated enough already, but I feel this belongs more so here. Now, and the DLC so far is pretty good, but unfortunately, as of making this, only the first 2 waves have come out, so I'll probably have to do a follow-up video soon explaining what I think of the rest of the DLC. So, that'll happen soon. But as it stands now, at least for the first 2 waves, I quite like it. Aside from the bonus items you unlock from getting it, you do get access to more emblem rings, such as the one for the house leaders in Three Houses, Edelgard, Dimitri, and Claude. You also get Tiki, and then with the wave 2, you get Soren, Camilla, and Hector, which can be earned through beating their respective paralogs, or the Divine Paralogs as they're called, which are completely separate from the rest of the world. Except for the Three Houses leaders, you pretty much just get those if you wander enough in the Somniel. These paralogs can be some fun, except for Camilla's. Screw the narrowy passageways and the long way to reach her. Seriously, it took me like forever to beat that one. Not because it was hard, it's because it took forever to get to her. I didn't like that one. The characters they chose for these DLC rings are also pretty solid. I loved seeing the Three Houses house leaders back and just seeing their bond supports with the other characters. It's just so charming. I love it so much. Even if Edelgard's design isn't the best, it's still so cute and charming to see it. And honestly, the characters they chose was pretty solid. Like Hector's a pretty good choice for another one of the GBA characters, and Soren's also really well liked as well. His bond supports can be quite fun just for how his personality is. Though I would say, I do not care much for Camilla at all. Seriously, why Intelligent Systems? Can they really not let go of her at all? She's not even that good of a character. Like, why couldn't they just choose Azura instead? Azura was the character that represented both sides of that war, whereas Camilla was only on one side. That decision will always baffle me, though. I guess there are a couple of reasons I can think of as to why they chose Camilla. Now, these emblem rings, at least from gameplay perspective now, are pretty overpowered, as the house leaders not only have an insane huge attack, but characters wearing said ring can use combat arts in exchange for turns the engaged effect lasts to do more devastating damage, and Tiki, who can grant a unit an entire extra health bar, which, geez, can be a lot of fun, albeit a bit game-breaking. Overall, while I can't say if it's fully worth it yet, I'll say as it is right now, I am happy I got the DLC for this game. I do like it quite a bit. Though I'll likely make a video on just the DLC in the future to evaluate if all the DLC is worth the $30, so yeah, we'll see about that. Also, one final thing I want to talk about, which I was unsure whether or not I was going to make this into its own video, but I'll just kind of put it here with some pictures and whatnot. But I just want to talk a little bit about the Divine Edition of this game. I know this is like a special edition, and Well, it isn't that different from like other special editions for other games in the series. Like the Three Hopes special edition is very, very, very similar to this one. I still really like the Divine edition of it. It's so cool. You get some really cool stuff, and I'll put pictures on the screen for stuff. You get like a steelbook of the game that's not bad, although to be honest, I've never really been a steelbook person. You get a cool poster that I'll put up sometime soon, some art cards that are fun, and my favorite thing, the big art book with all the concept sketches of the characters, which is really, really cool. I always love having art like this physically, and just seeing kind of like whatever changes were made during development. I just love this sort of stuff. I always find this stuff really, really cool. I've always found like art books and stuff like that rather interesting, so it's really cool to see it here. And while I did have to pay well above MSRP for this, I'm still glad I have it, and it's definitely one of my most treasured gaming treasures that I have. So, really, really glad to have that. Now, with that all of that out of the way, I suppose it's time to finally conclude this video. So, let's get to that. I've been talking about this game for quite a while now, and I'm sure there's still things I missed or forgot to mention, like the fishing minigame. I forgot to mention a fishing minigame in the gameplay section. I barely even touched that at all. Every game has to have a fishing minigame in it nowadays, but I hope you all have an idea of how much I like this game. Now, is Engage perfect? No. Hell no. I don't think anything can be perfect. Whether it's a game, movie, book, or anything. If you go into something expecting it to be perfect, you're pretty much just setting yourself up for disappointments. Unfortunately, while I've seen many people enjoy their time with the game, I've also seen many complain about the game or not enjoy it much, and it honestly sucks, because I do fear that this game will become the next Fates, where it's the game people will hate the most due to a few things that bring it down. And I'm not saying Fates is amazing, but it's nowhere near as bad as people say it is. Maybe I'll get into that someday, I don't know. It makes me a bit sad because while this game does have some issues, there's so many positives that the negatives never feel outweighed. Now, obviously I am one person, and not everyone will have the same experience as me, and that's fine. But to me, Fire Emblem Engage is not only an amazing game, but my new favorite Fire Emblem game. And this is coming from somebody who absolutely loves Three Houses to get to death. That game was my favorite in the series. And while that game is still really, really good, I think Engage has it barely beaten. I'm not really giving out scores anymore, but if you want an idea of how much I like Engage, I'd probably give it about a 9 out of 10. I do really, really like this game, and if you're someone who hasn't played this game, I highly recommend checking it out. Sure, it has some issues, but try to not let those single issues completely ruin your experience. If you play this game with an open mindset, you are sure to have plenty of fun, whether a veteran or a newcomer. I absolutely love this game. But it's time to pass that question over all over to you. What do you think of the Engage? Let me know down in the comments if you feel the same. And I know that saying that Engage being my favorite Fire Emblem is a bit out there because it sounds a little weird, but I don't have any shame in admitting it because I love this game so much. But let me know if you feel the same or whether or not you just like the game in general. Some of the stuff that you really like about the game, some of the stuff that you don't necessarily care for so much for with this game. I'm open to listen to anything. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. This has been a video idea that I've had well before Engage came out because I really wanted to do a video, and I'm so glad that this video turned out well. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more stuff like this, please consider hitting the subscribe button and checking out some of my previous videos. Yeah, and I will see you guys soon. You have yourselves a good day.